Chapter 4. As the weeks went on, somehow Lizzie kept finding ways to make it out more and more, and to stay out with us longer. None of us knew what she was doing, or how it was that she was getting away with it without her aunt and uncle finding out. She was also not really keen on sharing that information with us at first. She always liked to keep some secrets to herself. It was all going great until the day on the pier when we found out how she was doing it. So, how do you keep getting out without your aunt and uncle noticing? Tony asked, while we all sat on one side of the pier, dangling our feet high above the surface of the water, watching the tides roll in. Lizzie seemed as though she wasn't going to answer at first. The same way she seemed to pretend not to hear the question every time it was asked of her before that moment. It was a pattern that we were all getting really used to by then. She looked out at the horizon, watching a ship heading in to one of the docks a little bit down the shoreline. The slight redness of her hair glowed in the heavy sunlight. Taking a deep breath, it seemed like she was going to continue silently observing. However, to our surprise, she decided to open up to us on the subject of her escapes for the first time. "My window doesn't latch properly," she answered with only these words, without taking her eyes off the very large ship pulling into the dock. The rest of us looked at her puzzled for a moment, silently begging with serious intent for her to share more details with us. After keeping us in the dark for only another moment or so, she continued on with her explanation, while not removing her eyes from the now completely docked ship. "My uncle nailed the window shut the very day that I moved in," she began to explain, squinting a little as something on the ship reflecting the sunlight into her eyes. "He said it was because the latch was broken, and he didn't want anyone getting into the house through my window." She let out a small giggle, looking between us and then back at the ship before continuing on. "Luckily for me, though, he was so drunk as usual, and the nails don't actually attach to anything. They're just hammered into the wood around the actual window, but don't hold anything together. So as you can guess, it's pretty easy for me to get into and out of the house without being detected. It just slides right up." She paused for a moment, watching a seagull flying toward us from the direction of the docked ship, though it only goes up halfway. It's a real bitch to squeeze through sometimes. "That must be how you got that bruise." Dill pointed out a horrendous, large, blue and purple spot peeking out from behind the neck of her shirt. "Yeah," she unconvincingly agreed, as she pulled the neck of her shirt upward to cover up the bruise, no longer focusing on anything in the distance. I felt at that time that there was more to the story, but it didn't really feel like the right moment to pursue it any further, though I would learn pretty quickly that there was never really a right time at all. I mean, is there ever a really good time to bring up touchy and hurtful subjects? I don't think there is, or at least we never found it. Or in reality, I was always too much of a coward to push forward with uncomfortable conversations that really could have helped her when she needed us the most. Things just got worse and worse until she finally opened up to us in a fit of tears a couple of weeks later. We were in my basement once again for another movie night, as we always were on Saturday night. Some stupid movie was playing on the TV that doesn't really matter anymore, and really didn't even matter then. Just as usual, we were joking around and poking fun at one another when I spotted it. There was another bruise on Lizzie that she hid very poorly. This one was a lot bigger and on the inside of her thigh. Before you get any ideas, no, I'm not some sort of pervert who was creeping on her. I never thought of her in that way at all. She was running to get another drink from the refrigerator on the opposite side of my basement from the entertainment area. Instead of going around, she decided to run straight at the couch and leap over. As she did, her shorts lifted a little and her legs were eye level with me as I was sitting there at the time. I really couldn't avoid noticing it, and now I really wish that I hadn't seen anything at all, or that I would have approached the situation in an entirely different manner. As she opened the door to the refrigerator and searched through the contents, I approached her and put my hand on her shoulder softly but firmly. She looked up at me with big, bright smile of hers spread across her face. "You want one too?" she asked. It never seemed more happy except for her eyes, which were carrying such great sorrow. I didn't. What my stupid brain wanted was answers. Answers to why one of my best friends keeps appearing randomly get bruises on a regular basis. You see, those hadn't been the only ones we noticed. Just the two largest. "No, I just want to know what's going on," I responded to her. What do you mean?" she asked as her smile faded a little. But she tried to keep up an upbeat demeanor. What's going on?" I asked while pointing to her thigh. Her smile faded completely, and it took her a moment to search her mind for some excuse, some believable reason that I may take and accept enough to drop the subject once again. "Oh, that?" she finally managed to squeak out without looking me in the eye. "I hurt myself climbing through the window again." She looked up and searched my face for reassurance that I had believed her lie. I didn't, and it was pretty clear that this was the case. Panic drew across her face as she quickly closed the refrigerator door and walked back toward the sitting area and the other guys. She was probably hoping I would drop the subject and not keep pressing in front of Dill and Tony, thinking I wouldn't want to bring the other two into any confrontation that would arise. Maybe I should have done what she was hoping. Maybe I should have just sat down and watched the movie, forgot what I had seen, and tried to enjoy the movie. She took her seat in the single-person chair opposite the couch I had been sitting on. Tony and Dill could tell something was wrong, but couldn't quite figure out what it was by searching her face. Tony even looked at me with a look that asked me if everything was okay. He would quickly learn it wasn't, and that it would never be again. "Lizzie," I called out softly, just louder than the movie on the TV. She ignored me and pretended she didn't hear me, but for some stupid reason, I just couldn't drop the subject. "Lizzie," I called out a bit louder and a lot more sternly. She again ignored me, but I now had a full attention of both Tony and Dill, who sat there quite confused, and if I read their faces correctly, a little scared, or at the very least, they were concerned. I grabbed the remote from the table and hit the power button on the TV before calling out to her once more. "Lizzie," I was barely able to get out. with a shaky voice. This time she couldn't ignore me and couldn't pretend that I was being drowned out by the ambient noise. The only noise in the entire basement was of the chip Dill had just placed in his mouth and began to try to chew very quietly. It wasn't very quiet, though, as chips never are. What? Lizzie snapped back at me, to the surprise of the other two guys. The look she had given me was one I couldn't decipher. I couldn't tell if it was fear or hate, and now I think it probably may have been a mixture of both for prodding her into this discussion. Please, Lizzie, I began to plead with her. Tell us what's going on. What is really going on? Her gaze switched between the three of us for a moment. It appeared that she was trying to come up with another lie or excuse, but nothing seemed to come to her at the moment. The strong outer layer that she had been using to protect herself was starting to crack and crumble all around her. Vulnerability was beginning to break through, and tears began to pour from her eyes. Tony and Dill just sat there in confusion, not knowing what they should do, not really knowing if they should do anything at all. None of us had ever seen her show much emotion at all before this moment, and now she sits before us sobbing uncontrollably. Her tears splashed down upon her clothes, her hands, my chair, and the floor. I walked over to her, knelt down next to her, and placed my hand once again on her shoulder. Trying my best to comfort her, it took me a minute or two to say something. It's okay, Lizzie, was all I could think to speak aloud. We are all here for you. Without looking up, she quickly wrapped her arms around my neck and pulled me in close. She began to cry into my neck and chest, soaking my shirt. As she cried, the rest of us just sat there and let her get it out. After she had gotten what seemed like most of it out, she finally began to speak to us, finally revealing what it is she had been hiding for so long. They're horrible, she began, getting the words out through her still streaming tears. Who? Dill asked, but Tony and I had already put it together who she was talking about. My aunt and uncle, she continued. They beat me. They scream at me and he... She couldn't finish her sentence, but just fell back into me and continued sobbing as uncontrollably as she had been. We all know what she was trying to say, and I couldn't tell you which was stronger in us, the empathy for her or the hatred for the two of them. It's okay, I tried to comfort her without knowing what else to say. We are here for you, were the only words that came to me, though they just sounded thin and now to be empty bullshit words used to try to make people feel better. I motioned for the other guys to move in and comfort her as well. They did so, and within a few seconds, she was in the middle of the warmest embrace the three of us could muster up for her. We love you, Dill reassured her. Yeah, Tony also spoke from his heart. You know that. I don't know how long we remained in that embrace, but it was long enough for Lizzie to stop sobbing and her tears to dry up in her eyes. She took a moment to stand up, step back, and compose herself. After wiping her face and cleaning herself up, she continued on. They use her damn basement. Her sobbing turned to rage within a singular second before our eyes. So nobody can hear my screaming and crying. I've been locked down there so much. That's really messed up, Dill interjected. We have to do something, Tony added with his fist clenched so tightly that the area around his knuckles had turned pure white. "There's nothing you can do," Lizzie said as she faded back into her sadness and the chair in which she had been sitting. "Yes, there is." I finally found more words after searching for a few minutes. "We need to go to the police to get those bastards locked up." "No, you can't," Lizzie yelled at me, or possibly to me. I'm not really clear as to her emotional state. "That will only make things worse," she continued on. "No," Dill popped in again. "Aaron is right." "No, he isn't." Lizzie stuck to her guns, really not wanting us to pursue any such idea. "She's right," Tony agreed with her, to mine and Dill's surprise. "We need to take care of this ourselves." He finished up with a determined look in his eyes, nodding to Lizzie to get her approval. Without saying another word, she just got up and began to walk toward the stairs leading out of my basement. The three of us quickly got up and began to follow her. She stopped us, and before going up the steps, she had one more thing to say to us. "You said that you love me." Tears welled up in her eyes once again before she went on. "If you do, you will drop the subject and forget this conversation ever happened," she stated before disappearing up the stairs. She may have been right. Maybe we should have let her deal with it in her own way. Thank you for listening. I release new chapters every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. If you prefer to read, I do release all 3 chapters every Sunday on my Wordpress. If you know anybody else who might be interested in this story, please feel free to share.